Hi, my name's Mike. I make music as domestic scene, and in this video I'm going to give you an overview of the way that I set up, record, and export files for the live synth jams that I've been putting up on YouTube. This is mostly aimed towards beginners, but if you have experience doing this sort of thing, you still might find it interesting to watch somebody else's workflow and approach. If you find this useful, please subscribe to the channel. If you want me to address anything specifically, you can leave me a question down in the comments, and I'm happy to reply there. Maybe if it's something that you think I should go into more detail about, I can do a follow-up video. In the meantime, I just finished an album that's now available on Bandcamp, and you can find a link to that in the description below. The album's called Imperfectionist, and it was recorded in almost an identical way to what I'm going to demonstrate here. In this video I do go into how I set up sequences on the Deluge a bit, and that's the main piece of equipment that I use to write music with. I don't go into great depth of how I put the songs together. There's tons of other channels out there that are doing really great tutorials on how to use the Deluge, and I'll add a couple links in the description to some of those channels as well. I'm going to make a follow-up to this video about how I mix, edit, and master the final tracks for streaming services like Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, etc. So if you find this one valuable, stick around for the second one. It should be out in about a week or two. Let's get to it. Right, so here's the two main pieces of gear that I used to record the album. It wasn't always both of these, and sometimes there was something else in the mix too, but this is the most representative of what I did. And definitely the Deluge is the primary piece of what I'm doing, because the Deluge is where I do all of the compositional work, sketch things out, put in tons of sequences, and plan things out. The Drumbrute Impact is always taking second stage to that. But in performance, I find that having a drum machine on top of the Deluge and having two separate pieces of gear just gives me options and is fun to play. It's fun to kind of have an interaction and know that if something's going here, I can mess with knobs and stuff here and rely on what's happening on the Deluge, and vice versa. It's just been a fun way for me to play. Personally, I don't think that playing DAW-less music means that your music never touches a DAW. In the end, I think using a computer is the most convenient way to finish whatever you're working on. However, it doesn't mean that you have to use a computer. There's plenty of good options. For instance, you could use some sort of recorder. This is a Zoom H4n, and in fact I did actually make a jam recently using the H4n as my recording device. But even that's not necessary, because the Deluge, you can resample and record everything internally onto the SD card. My point is, there's lots of ways to do it. So you need to decide what's going to work for you. For me, it worked really well just because of the setup I have here to record everything directly into Ableton through my interface. And I'm using a Motu 16A. It's got 16 in, 16 out. The reason that I have such a kind of overpowered I/O is because I bought an analog desk and I wanted to hook that up. In the end, I didn't use it to record in any of this stuff. What I can do later on is mix things multi-track on that desk, but for recording purposes, I just put everything directly into the inputs of the interface through a patch bay, and I'm hoping I have B-roll. Alright, so now everything's hooked up. I've got the left and right line out from the Deluge going into the patch bay, patch through to the interface. Also, I have the line out from the Drumbrute Impact going into the interface on its own channel, and there's a little breakout section on the back. So I've isolated the kick, so it's bypassing the master output, and the kick is going out independently into its own channel. So you can see that in Ableton I've got now a stereo track that's recording the Deluge, mono track with the kick, and then everything else is on the Drumbrute track. So these three tracks are my main recording tracks. So with the tracks that I make, I typically then have just these three tracks in the end to mix with. Right now, obviously, I have a voiceover track, so this is just recording the microphone. But typically, it's just these three tracks that I'm recording. And yeah, so let's see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new song file right now. To do that, I hit Shift, and then the load button when you hit Shift makes a new file on the Deluge. So that's done. We have something empty. If I hit play, there's nothing there. And I'm just going to go ahead and load up some of the samples from Hindbox Isolation Loops Soundpack. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I would recommend you do so. He's offered it for free. You can give him some money if you want, but it's on his Bandcamp, and so I'll put a link to that in this video. The samples sound great, and I love what he does, and I get so much inspiration from his channel. So go check it out if you want, and meanwhile, I'll spend a few minutes just getting a basic loop ready to go so we can record it. So I've made this first track a empty kit track, so that's pressing Shift and Kit. That just completely makes a new kit, which is all sample-based kits. Kits on the Deluge are all sample-based. So this is completely empty right now. There's just one slot for a sample, but it's empty right now. So right here you can see it's asking me to choose a folder to find a sample in. So here's the folder that I have the Hindbox samples in. So just kind of can scroll through different samples in here. Okay, so I like that. Actually, no, with the kit, I think I want something more rhythmic. So if I hold right here and then hit the load button, it will bring me back into the sample select menu. Okay, this sounds nice. Okay, so I've got a sample loaded up. If I audition it, you can hear it. And so on this channel, if I click here, it will load in. I think this is right now set to just be 1 bar, 4 beats, currently set at 120 BPM. So it probably will cut off if I press play. Yeah. So in order to fix that, what I typically do would be press Shift, and then in the bottom corner here with your sample, there's a shortcut for mode. So you go there, and right now it's at the cut mode, and if I change that to stretch, it should change the tempo to fit. So now it's looping seamlessly, but just doesn't sound right? So right now it's still just 1 bar, so it's playing this probably 4 bar loop condensed down into 1 bar. So I've got to deal with that. So shift and turning this left-right knob, bring this out to a 4-bar sequence. Put that back in. Okay, yeah, that's sounding good. Not sure that I want to play at this tempo, so I'm gonna slow the tempo down, and you can hear the sample is adjusting along with it. Yeah, this is a tempo I'm feeling tonight. So we'll stick here. I guess I'm at 92 BPM. And yeah, I'll just set a bunch of stuff up and check back in a minute. Well, it's been more than a minute. Honestly, I don't really know how long it's been. But I have something here that I could jam with. But if I'm going to record this, the most important thing that I need to do before I do that is work on the mix on the Deluge. Because if I'm recording just the stereo signal out, I can't go in later and like lower the sound of one synth or change some of the EQ relative to other parts in the track. And for recording all the tracks in my album, that was really the key, was to make sure that the EQ was as good as, or the mix was as good as I could get it going into the DAW. Because yeah, I just didn't have a lot of options to change it later. And it's kind of an important note to make that that was what I wanted. I spent so much time before I switched to a hardware setup like this. I spent so much time in the details of the sounds, like just agonizing over where exactly to make EQ cuts, or all of that, that I just was never really finishing songs. And switching over to something like this, where I press play not really knowing how the song's going to turn out, and committing to it and being done when I was done making this, done with the jam, and I was done with the song. Basically, that's really the idea, and that really helped me move forward. I know that there's a couple of trouble spots in this this little jam that I've made right now, so I'll go in and look for some of them. Yeah. So. Okay, so these are some of the loops from Hindbox Sample Pack, and I think that one of these has this like bassy noise that's not really working. There it is, right? So on the Deluge, there's a couple of key things that are really easy to get to, and that's the level pan and on the the level and the pan are the first options here. So that's the upper and lower gold knobs. So the top one is like level, like how loud or quiet it is, and the pan off to the right, off to the left. And then if I go into the second effect bank, I've got the cutoff and resonance. So it's like it's variable. So it can be a low cut, a high cut, or a kind of broadband EQ balancing sort of thing. So here I'm going to go and try to cut off the low end of this sound. Okay, so normally you wouldn't really be mixing with something soloed like this, but just for the sake of demonstration, I've done it. So I've gotten rid of the low end of that, and if I put the rest of this in there, I'm not getting so much of this kind of like feel out of it, because the reason I don't want that is the beat that I'm using is not really like a 4 on the floor sort of thing, and so that really low end rumbly like regular boom 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 was fighting the beat. So now we'll see what we got. So now these loops sound like they're working a little bit more, kind of adding just like a little bit of movement or a counterpoint to what's going on with the drum brute, and sounding pretty good, and it's not fighting the kick drum anymore. And I'll just throw on a bunch of this other stuff. Let's see what, I know one of these was pretty loud, so I haven't done any leveling. I think that this is the bass, so I think I need more of it. So I'm going in to raise the volume. Good. I'm just turning on some of these. There it is. That's the one that's really loud, obviously. So go in there and just turn that the hell down. And what I love about working on hardware like this is that I don't have visual feedback, so I'm just listening. And that's completely different than when you're producing in a DAW. Like in the DAW, you're always looking at waveforms, and you see your level meters, and everything's right there in front of you, which is great for control, but it just, in my experience, kind of sucks some of the life out of production. So now I'm just using my ears until it sounds right. Okay, so on this sound here, I've gone into the EQ setting. So if you click on the gold button, you can kind of cycle through low pass filter, high pass filter, and this EQ. So, I mean, I actually don't know what the EQ is shaped like, but it sounds kind of like it's like a wide, maybe like a high shelf or some sort of bell filter, but it's kind of broad. So you can use it to kind of brighten up a song, a sound, or give it a little bit more of a low presence. I hear it mostly, not so much in the low end, but I feel like that EQ is probably a high shelf, because I mostly hear it on the high end. I'm losing this piano. So give it a little bit of level. And then I'm gonna just brighten it up a bit so it pokes through. And then there's a lot going on with these kind of test equipment tones that is happening in the rhythm, and I'm not hearing a ton of that, so I'm gonna try to get some of these back in. Yeah, so I'm feeling like I'm hearing most of the elements right now. And yeah, so this is essentially what I got when I start a jam, right? Like I've got a bunch of layers on top of each other that are playing. They all sound fine when they're all on. What I have no idea about is what it's going to sound like when I start playing the track. Like I have a vague idea of how many tracks will be on when I start. That's about it. So I'm just going to go ahead, play this as a jam, try to make some sort of arrangement out of it, make it move and build up and go away and all of that, and see what we have at the end. And then we'll look at how it looks in the recording, and then how we can make it sound even better afterwards. So yeah, no further ado. So I'll just let that sound kind of like fade out before I press play. Okay, so that's not what I wanted. So with the Drumbrute, right? Mute groups. Screw the drums. Don't want them. Okay, that's what I want. So, let's try this again. I love that little tinkly sound that's in this sample. So that's it, I guess. Again, as normal, not really what I expected it to sound like. But that's a jam. Alright, yeah, it's late, so I'm gonna go to bed and try mixing this later. Cheers. So it's a new day, I'm wearing a different denim shirt, and I'm ready to start mixing this track. Before I start doing that, I just want to touch on something. I think that when you record a jam like this and put it onto YouTube, you owe it to the audience on YouTube to not alter the sound too much. I tend not to do anything extreme in terms of mixing and mastering on anything that I put out as a jam on YouTube, because I think that most people that watch those sorts of things are doing research on synths and want to know what they sound like. They don't want to. I think it's just kind of more honest to put it out sort of raw. But if you're going to be releasing it on SoundCloud or Spotify or anything like that, I think you owe it to yourself to put the work in to actually do some EQ and sweeten up the sound a little bit and make it sound as polished as you can and put your best foot forward that way. So yeah, it's kind of two different processes. So quickly, before I start getting into the mix of the final track, I'll do what I typically might do for a jam and just kind of do some light limiting to get the level up to about -14 LUFS, which I think YouTube is kind of recommended to be about -13. So yeah, somewhere in that range, just so that it's loud enough when I upload the track to YouTube, it'll sound right, but without changing the character of the recording. So I'll get into this recording here. I've already transferred all these tracks off to do the work on the video, kind of recording things a little bit differently now so I can isolate the computer audio, and so I'll just get rid of the stuff I don't need here, trim this up, and start editing and yeah, mixing. Okay, and like I said, for the first export, which I just want to use as the audio for the jam that I would upload to YouTube, really I just make sure that the levels are right. Like it sounds like maybe the Drumbrute kit, like the sounds, not the kick drum, but the rest of the sounds, could use a decibel or two. Usually think it's easiest just to throw on the utility and then just give it a slight little bump. Okay. Yeah, and then like I said, everything seems more or less balanced, and then on the master I will use a plugin by Isotope, Ozone 8. Yeah, so with Ozone 8, I usually just kind of turn off the EQ, turn off the dynamics, and just look at the maximizer. I actually usually don't even use that. I like to just use this simple limiter. And then we can make sure that we're seeing LUFS as our metering type. Kind of go into one of the louder sections, play it. I can see right now I'm at -18 LUFS. So I'll just lower lower the threshold a bit. Kind of going until I just see the line that kind of represents the compression starting to activate. So it's starting to compress a little bit, but it looks like I'm not quite up to the level that I should be for playback. So I'll just give it just a bit more. And now it looks like we're kind of getting into the right range. This is a pretty quiet part, so I'll go back to yeah, so when everything's in, we're kind of bouncing, perhaps a little bit hot, so I'll back this off a little bit. The limiter's activating, but it's not making any massive changes to the sound. If I gain match everything and bypass this limiter, it should sound the same, more or less. Yeah, so like I said, I've mostly just dealt with the level, tried to get it up to something that would be acceptable for streaming on YouTube, and it sounds good to me, and so I'll just export this and then we can move on to what I would do for the final album version. So I hope you found this video useful. Keep an eye out for the second one in this series where I go through editing, mixing, and mastering for streaming services, and particularly with the idea of kind of making a cohesive album of multiple tracks. That should be out in a week or two if all goes to plan. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you checked out my new album Imperfectionist. The link's below. Subscribe to this channel, all of that stuff, and yeah, I'll catch you next time. Cheers.